Life in Cyber. Welcome back. Let's do it.
I'm thinking about this. It'd be like bienvenido, vida y. I don't know what cyber is in Spanish.
Yeah, that's a good question. I was just thinking about that too. What is cyber? What is cyber, and why are you trying to get into it?
Whoa,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah, while you
aggressive.
Save yourself.
Is that what we're talking about today, guys?
Yes.
Why one does not want to get in this career field.
Friends
join
join cybersecurity, man.
I like that one. I find it funny. We always talk about the glamour of cybersecurity and how cool it is some days, but I think it's time for us to look beyond that and tell them what the really day-to-day life looks like, right?
If we're talking glamour, then yeah, I think we're sending the wrong message. It's not glamorous.
I think there's a lot about cybersecurity that sounds really cool, especially when you're first learning it and studying it. But then when you actually get into the workforce, you're like, what are these jobs? This is not what I was taught. This is not what they promised me. That's true. That welcome to cybersecurity. Let's get to it.
Spreadsheets in space. Just kidding.
I'm not talking about the pay difference either. Completely separate.
So our first segment today is going to be about the unseen workforce.
That's me.
And
The red door, for anyone who's watched the IT crowd, is definitely the workforce that sits in the dark room and normally in the back corner until something goes wrong.
Yes, generally, if you see us, that's because something has gone wrong, and stay out of our way.
Or we got in the elevator for snacks.
That's normally when you find them, is when they go look for snacks.
my biggest thing with these types of jobs is a lot of people get into cybersecurity because they're interested in like hacking. They like programs like Hack the Box. They like learning about pen testing and all of those types of attacks that exist, and they want to like practice those in a way that's not going to get anybody in trouble or hurt anyone. But that's not what cybersecurity jobs are, right? Like a lot of the more essential roles, the one that are more likely for you to see out there, they're blue teamers and they're compliance. And I'm sorry, compliance is probably the most in high demand, but it's boring. You're reading legal
boring.
documentation all the time.
And then when you get done, you get to start over and review it.
And then audit it.
For the next year.
Yep, and then you update the KPIs. A lot of paperwork.
So take me to the day in the life of a compliance cybersecurity analyst, for instance.
Policies and procedures and baselines and standards. And you get to read those and then edit them if you see a typo or add words to it if you want to. And then you submit it for approval. And then someone else looks at it and modifies your grammar because Shannon sucks. And then it goes to a final draft and it finally gets approved and it gets implemented into your policy and procedure system.
And just like our textbooks, it's then outdated.
Always.
Yeah. And then you start over. And then every once in a while, NIST or whoever framework you decide to align with comes out with a new article and they're like, hey, you need to revise all of your shit again earlier because we just revised everything.
So in layman's term, what is an audit? What are you looking at all day?
Audit in form of compliance is making sure that people are following your baselines and your standards that you've implemented within your own organization.
So you're logged into the firewalls and systems all day?
No, not at all. Sysadmins get to do that stuff. Compliance people, we do the paperwork that I was talking about with the policies and procedures. Did you not understand?
Hey, I want to make sure it's crystal clear that you're not actually in the systems. You are a paper pusher. That's really what you're doing, right?
And here's the part that bothers me the most about this is even when you start to like break down those frameworks and you're like, oh yeah, I know what that means. It's all legally written in a legal jargon. So that way it's not based on a specific technology or it doesn't tell you necessarily how to do it. It just tells you have to do it. So like, for example, authentication, it's like you need to make sure that people are uniquely identified. Okay. So we have to give them a password. No, we're not going to tell you you have to give them a password, but you have to make sure they're uniquely identified, right? And you, as a security compliance person, can't tell people how to do it. That's up to the sysadmins. You just have to make sure they're doing it. And it's so difficult to like draw those lines because the sysadmins are going to say, well, how? What am I supposed to do? And you're going to say, you're supposed to make sure they're uniquely identified. It drives me insane.
I get to tell them when their solution is stupid and to make it better.
But you can't tell them what solution is better.
Right. If they come back and say, we want to use generic usernames, I can say, no, you cannot do generic usernames based off of the floor. That's dumb.
That's not uniquely identified. Yeah.
Right. Try again, sysadmins, and then come back and let me know. I'll look at your work. You get
the other
set the objectives.
The other job that exists is blue team, and a lot of people are like, okay, that means I get to take all these cybersecurity principles and harden servers and stuff. No. That's what sysadmins do.
Correct.
Blue team, which is security operations teams, they get to manage the antivirus. They get to manage the firewalls. They might have a say in some network access control lists and maybe IDS and IPS. But that's kind of it. Like, if you're like, okay, well, I'm going to go and harden all of these servers and I'm going to run scans on them and make sure that blah, blah, blah. You might run scans and send the reports to the sysadmins and tell them they need to fix it. You don't fix it.
The scans are the fun part because then you can take those findings and write more policies and procedures about the stuff that the sysadmins get to do. Really, if you're in
you get to look at the logs too.
Yeah, if you're in anything besides like Word or Excel, you're doing security wrong as far as compliance and blue team goes. Because the sysadmins do the work. We use our words.
Communication is key, right? Absolutely.
And nobody's good at that.
So you're just a Word and Excel guy, but does that mean you're working for the company now, or
I work for the company. I'm in the background. Remember, you see me in the elevator. I go get snacks. You say, "Hey, that's Shannon," and I go, "I don't know who you are, but hi, I'm glad you know my name."
Is that normal in the industry, though? To actually work for the company?
Sometimes, I mean, there are people that I contract with, the contractors. They get to do the cool stuff like the pen testing and the vulnerability scanning and then tell me how to do my job better so I can tell the sysadmins how to do their jobs.
Yeah, I was kind of leaning towards the MSAs themselves because even the previous company I used to work for at Dish didn't even have their own cyber team. Everything was 100% contracted out. So not all the times do you find that the cybersecurity teams are on the payroll for the company themselves. You normally work for a separate company.
Yeah. And normally that's dictated through insurance now. As you would know, if you worked in compliance and blue team, we have to hire the smarter people that do the incident handling and incident response through our insurance. And then they come and tell us how we're doing a bad job.
And here's the biggest problem with that too is when you're talking about like job opportunities, right? Like, let's say you're fresh out of college, you've got a cybersecurity degree. Can you go and apply to work for those people to do the pen testing and the red team stuff and the auditing and all that stuff? You could try. Here's the problem is every single one of those contracting companies have how many hundreds of customers, right? So like where you would normally have a lot more jobs if every company's hiring internally, these people are basically consolidating those into one company. And yeah, they've got some opportunities available, but not nearly as many as you'd think because it's not a full-time job to do that all the way through an entire year for one customer. You might do dozens of customers throughout a year and then come back and revisit them next year, right? So the workforce on that is actually a lot smaller. So it's highly competitive and it is not entry level.
You know, there is an entry level job in that you could use to pivot, and that is the incident handle. Is it the incident handling team? You know, they sit behind a screen and they read alerts and they read the
security
logs.
analyst.
Yep.
Yeah, that's the
read
entry
logs.
level position. If you're willing to tolerate that position, you could eventually move up. But
yeah, you're going to be definitely working in the SOC, right?
Yep.
The Security Operations Center, most likely.
Yeah, you have to like to read, and you have to be willing to be a log junkie because That's what they do. They sit you behind that screen and you alert the smart people of when an alert goes off.
Well, and now you're automating a lot of that, right? Like, so you've got software tools that are reading through a lot of those logs, and then those tools are alerting you, and then you go and alert the people that work there.
You have to
It's
have someone that creates the alerts, though, the playbooks that they trigger off of.
Yeah, so there's a little bit of development, it's a little bit of coding and scripting, but still,
Most of
it's
the time, that's the senior guys that are doing that.
right.
Yeah.
You, as an
So
entry guy, is not writing the alert itself.
You're
And
just
that's
verifying it's working.
that's where I'm getting at. Like those entry level jobs are kind of like shrinking as well because that automation is becoming more efficient.
Right. And I think that takes us to our next segment of the misconceptions in the field. A lot of people get into the field, like you said, and want to be red team, right? They want to be
Yeah.
the pen tester. They want to be the ones that are hacking into the systems and being the hopefully white hat, right? What's
they
the
want to
truth of
save
breaking
the
into
day.
that field? Can you get into that field pretty easily, or
You
Well,
can't, in my experience, get into that field really quickly.
No, it's tough. You really got to build some kind of experience. Even when you get into security, at least in the past, it was very much like have some network experience, have some server experience, then use that to pivot into it. But that's kind of what I think the red team has really turned into is kind of like get your experience as an analyst, know what to look for in the logs because you're going to use that skill set, learn how to script because you're going to use that skill set. It's really learning some of those basics so that you can get into that and pivot. But even then, like Kenny has been alluding to, it's extremely competitive. Extremely competitive. You really have to start in a way to make a name for yourself or join one of these companies that are, contractors and really get in somewhere and work your way up.
well, and shout out to an interview we did earlier this year with Drew Kirkpatrick. So check out the hopefully we could put a link in the below to make sure you see that video. But that like Drew is a red team pen tester, and he told us like it ain't easy, guys, and no, it ain't entry level. Like it takes years of experience to get here, and it takes a little bit of luck. Like, sorry guys, pen testing ain't that easy to break into. And this is what I try to tell students is it's really, really challenging, even if you have the skills to get that job. Don't put all your eggs in that basket. If you want to do cybersecurity, do it, but know that you're going to have to take one of these other roles first.
And say you are one of those people, you are into pen testing, you're testing the systems, you actually get in. Are you going to want to see what they actually have on their systems?
well, you're starting to get into the digital forensics side of the house too. Yeah.
I am.
So the day in the life of working for DCI, so criminal investigations for most cities, they normally do have a digital forensics investigator that's on site. Um, Shannon's not wrong. Day to day, what do you think the criminal cases that are going to come across your desk? Is it going to be all about intellectual property and pirating, or is it going to involve sexual trafficking, or even worse, issues with child pornography? These are things that you'll have to deal with on the day-to-day basis.
Mm-hmm. Crime scenes as well. Stuff that I never wanted to get into. I was actually really good at it. And then I found out what I would have to look at it. And I was like, nope, not going to do it.
So I'm one of those people that really liked forensics. I took forensics into class and I practiced it a little bit on the side, just seeing if I could apply the skills outside of class. And I ended up finding some stuff I really didn't want to about some people that I really didn't want to. And I had to report that stuff because you're legally obligated. And I ended up going down a rabbit hole on that one, and that was not a fun thing that I would recommend for anyone. So recognize that even if you're doing digital forensics, which is a really cool skill and it's a really fun skill set, until you realize the content and the things you're dealing with, you're not dealing with good people. And a lot of the types of jobs for that too, you're moving into things like law enforcement and government, and that can be a really difficult place to work. I think we all know what's going on, like how law enforcement's really challenging to work for. But imagine working for like the NSA doing similar type of work and collecting information and finding forensics information that points to another government, and you can't do anything about it, right? That's the other really challenging part is, especially with forensics and pen testing, is you're there to report, you're not there to fix. And that makes it really challenging for people who like to fix stuff, which is what most of us are. Let's be real.
From what I've seen psychologically with people who have those positions is they've become emotionally, to where they're desensitized, I guess is the word that I'm going to use.
Okay.
They see that content repetitively every single day. They become desensitized to it. and it strains their mental health. So a lot of them end up getting on depression and anxiety and going to
Right.
therapy because they've become desensitized to this stuff. They can't fix it. They can't go find the bad guy. They can't beat the crap out of them. So what outlet do they have?
Right. They can't be the next Dexter. But that's definitely it. Is there's a major increase in PTSD cases with people that get into that world, because you will come down with something if you're a good human being, which you're going to be because you're working in a selfless act kind of position, because these positions don't pay very well, right? You're working for government, you're working for a local city, maybe the police department. They don't pay the best. No, you get paid better looking through those logs and that compliance officer for sure. um, but there's definitely the second part of that we always have to worry about.
And the other piece of that, like I try to compare things like digital forensics in that regard, as well as like, social media moderation I can put up there as well sometimes, depending on the platform, of course. But I try to compare those essentially to the same level of like mental trauma that you'll experience in an emergency room. It's really difficult.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's crazy. So we hit a little bit on the blue team reality a little bit earlier today, and was talking about how boring some of those compliance roles are. And so as we think about the blue team, what other mundane tasks do you think will be there for the day to day?
Yeah,
Shannon, I
Shan,
know you've worked blue team a little bit, right?
I've worked blue team a little bit, and it actually depends on the size of your organization. If you work for a small, medium business, you can find yourself working those maintenance windows and those patch windows, as well as doing the vulnerability assessment. But with larger organizations, you tend to be siloed into your one thing. Like right now, I'm compliance and I'm a little bit vulnerability, but I don't go into sysadmin mode. So you got to find that line that they want you to do, and then you need to walk it. So if you're in small, medium business, you get to do a little bit of everything still. But if you're in a large organization, you better stay in your silo because that's where they want you, and don't get out of it.
Stay in your lane, man. What the
Yeah,
hell? Get in there.
and I think the hardest part, especially when you're at a larger organization in security, is you have a hard time finding that sense of accomplishment, because I don't know about you guys, but I don't feel accomplished when I'm doing paperwork at all. I don't get any sense of it. Like, oh, I finished. Now I got to go to the next one. I'm just kind of bums me out.
How exciting! Spreadsheets, yay!
The only sense of accomplishment that I get is when you actually go in to make sure that you're compliant and people are following the stuff that you've actually produced. And you can be like, I see the security controls that you guys have implemented here. Have you ever thought about doing this in addition? And then they deliberate and say yay or nay why they did or did not do or had not thought of. That's about the only sense of accomplishment that I get as far as compliance goes. And it sucks. One other thing that I wanted to touch on is, like a sysadmin, I do have access to everything. Like I can get into the firewall, I can get into the antivirus, I can get into the EDR, but it is just to make sure that the antivirus is functioning properly, the EDR is functioning properly, the perimeter firewall. No one's gotten in there and created like an any rule and threw it up at the top, done anything stupid like that. Completely for checking. I do not modify.
And the other problem that I have too is you were talking about, staying in your lane earlier. I know a lot of folks really don't like hearing "stay in your lane." It's kind of an anti-growth mindset for people professionally, which is true in my opinion. And I'm not a stay in your lane kind of guy myself. But the problem is, like, when in cybersecurity, that is not a mentality, that's a requirement. Like if you read like PCI DSS controls, for example, which for those that don't know, it's for credit card payments. You have to have that separation of duties, and you have to enforce it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's enforced in a lot of different security frameworks. So stay in your lane is not a suggestion; it's a requirement to be compliant. And that's really, really tough on people who are trying to like expand their skill set and grow their careers.
SOX
If you want,
compliance.
yeah, if you want to expand your skill set, stick with small, medium business at the beginning of your career. And then if you want to pivot into a large organization, now that you have your skill set, feel free.
Mm-hmm.
If you
I
want to
totally agree
grow,
with that. Yeah.
if you want to be a one-man shop, stick to small, medium business.
Right, because when you're in those smaller businesses, you may be working with one or two other IT personnel, so
Yeah.
you don't have the privilege of saying that's not my job, right? So if
Yeah.
you really do want to grow, if you want to be the sysadmin that also does security, that's the way to do it, I think.
That comes
You
with its
get
own trade-offs, right? Like the pay is lower, the stress is higher, your responsibility is higher than it should be. Your work-life balance tends to suck. Like it's all of these things are trade-offs, right? And it comes down to like, what are you particularly looking for at this stage in your life? And that's a personal discussion with yourself, right?
Well, you pulled the stress out of there. That was our next segment. So stress and the blame game is how we have this one labeled. It's talking about the stressful nature and the high stakes involved. It's not that it wasn't my fault. It was a hacker. I'm sure there's plenty of stories here.
I mean, at the end of the day, the court doesn't really care whose fault it is. They just need to make sure that you're doing your due diligence and due care. If you're not, then you can get in trouble for it.
The part that I find really
Which,
challenging with this is like, as a security professional, you are inside, let's say internal to the organization anyway. You are the bad guy that's telling people this is how you have to do your job. And you're the one putting barriers up to make that more difficult, right? Like you now have to do multi-factor authentication. You now have to use VPN with multi-factor. You have to do blah, blah, so many different controls that make it more and more steps for somebody to do something basic. And people get mad at that and they get frustrated, different password rules, blah, blah, blah. And of course we have to change that over time. And now we have to make you do training for phishing and social engineering and all of that stuff. And everybody gets really flustered because why do they care? They're a finance specialist trying to count the beans. This is not their job. It's your job. But our job is to make sure that they know this stuff so they can protect everything, because the weakest point is a problem, right? So you're the bad guy for that internally in the day-to-day, and that's when there's not even an attack going on. Then when an attack actually does happen, and let's say ransomware runs rampant through your organization, now it's your fault because you didn't do good enough job. It's very stressful and often thankless. We say that IT is a thankless job. It is more thankless in cybersecurity than it is in like tech support, for example.
touching on what you said there, Kenny, about people having to do MFA and go through all of these steps for procedures, the bonus is you get to do it on your personal device. We're not going to provide one for you to do it. So hope you're okay with installing apps for work on your personal device, because compliance says he has to do it.
I think earlier today you gave us a quote, and I loved the quote. I want to share that with the audience.
Yeah. I say that security in the organization is kind of like seagulls. They come in and they shit all over everything. And then when they're done, they decide to leave and give it to everybody else to clean up. I learned that actually this week from a sysadmin director who specifically told me that that's what my job role is I come in, I shit all over everything, and then when I'm done, their team gets to clean it up. And I'm like, you're not wrong.
And you steal their snacks while you're at it.
Exactly.
I want snacks.
I think, though, that gets to another point, too, of whose fault is it when something goes wrong? And here's the problem is, like, as an IT leader in my realm, I don't think pointing the finger for blame is even worthwhile conversation. Like, solve the problem and identify root cause and move forward, right? And if root cause is a human, the answer, the solution is not pointing the finger, blaming them, firing them. Sometimes it could be, depending on how bad or what the mistake was, or if it was like actual negligence, whatever. But ultimately, it's let's find the solution and move forward. And a lot of the time, that solution is training, right? But that's the hard part is human nature. When something goes wrong, when in cybersecurity, it can often be catastrophic. So human nature is going to say, who did this to me? Whose fault is this? And they don't know who it is, because usually attackers are really good at obfuscation. And so most of the time, like, our answer is, we don't know. And so their answer back to you is, well, it must be you then. That sucks. That's really hard.
Yeah, they like to blame the security personnel for sure. It's not that the hacker was there doing it, but why weren't you doing your job to prevent them from doing it in the first place? And we like to use that term all the time, right? Our weakest link is our users, because Fred in accounting clicked on the phishing link and downloaded malware to his PC is my fault. So why was he allowed to do it in the first place? Well, I wanted to block it. So it ends up being that we use this term a lot. We say CYA. I want to fix this so that this can't happen. And what does your boss tell you?
No.
So what do? You print it off and you make a Bible of CYAs for when they blame you. You're like, I told you about this and you told me I couldn't do it.
Well, and
there's a lot of CYA in our position for sure.
let's add to this a conversation we had in a past episode. I can't remember how far back. Sorry, guys. But there was a past episode we had where we talked about how CISOs were being talked about to be held accountable for these types of attacks. And that's a law that's currently, or a bill or a law that's currently up for debate. And we're, as cybersecurity professionals, terrified of that because most of the time it's not necessarily us that's causing this to be a weakness. It's a lack of funding, it's a lack of resources, it's a lack of prioritization because cybersecurity doesn't create growth, which is not capitalist in nature, which doesn't, it's not incentivized in our business model, right? That's really, really difficult and a very, very scary line if that passes, right?
The big thing is also it's a lack of accountability. Security is supposed to be a business type activity. Each department has their own accountability on what they're doing for that. They're supposed to be there with you, discussing the risks, discussing how to remediate those risks. And then you run into those situations where it's like, here's your risk. And if they tell you, well, I don't want to do that, then yeah, you do those CYAs and you have that to kind of back you up. Because as we've seen with the solar wind hack, the Security and Exchange Committee will go after CISOs if they find them to be the one that caused the problem, or at least didn't identify or tell the right departments, hey, you have this problem and you need to fix it. So you got to cover your own ass there.
I think that's why compliance is such a big job, is because there's actual massive risks for the company, right? Versus any other type of risk. Oh, the hacker came in and stole my IP. Okay, our job is to either mitigate, transfer, or accept the risk. That is our job. And if compliance forces us to do something, it's easy for us to justify. Otherwise, we're just like, well, we don't want to spend the $200,000 on that firewall. We're okay with it. We're going to accept that risk. But that's because you don't have a compliance or a regulatory body that's going to come down and, beat their ass, right?
So we've talked a lot about cyber roles in most organizations. There are a couple of places where it's good. And this is where I wanted to bring this up, and I wanted to highlight, like, I'm going to explain why, and I'm going to ask you all to guess where they are. They're good for cybersecurity because they're not worried about the business model. And a very wise person that I work with says, if you want to understand why somebody does something, try to understand their incentive. So if you look at normal companies, why don't they invest in cybersecurity? Because it doesn't make them more money. What are the areas that don't worry about making money?
Schools.
Debatable.
Well, it's really what are the places that have the funding whenever they need it, and that's the government and the military.
Military government. Yeah.
Can I read the sheet? It's military and government, guys.
Oh,
So the nice thing about military and government is there are cyber jobs aplenty, and they're very much needed. And they're not incentivized by making the almighty dollar. They're funded through tax dollars, and if something is of utmost importance to the country, they pay for it, and they will use tax dollars to pay for that. And so you often will get more support in cybersecurity in those areas. Downside, it's government military. You don't always control what job you get, right? So, like, for example, if you apply to work at the NSA, you apply to work at the NSA. You don't apply for a specific position. You put your name in the pool, and they will assign you a position and make an offer, right? It's very, and that's how most of the military and government work in that regard. So it's very different, but it is fulfilling potentially, and you might have a chance to do red team, blue team, all kinds of stuff in that kind of regard.
now, the thing that I would like to say about that is, are those jobs easy to get?
I would say personally, I think they're easier than private, simply because there's more of them, and they're less focused on compliance. There is compliance. Don't get me wrong, but they're less focused on things like PCI DSS compliance because they're the military, right? They're not necessarily taking your credit card. They're
That's
focused
true.
on protecting national security, being
But the
compliant with other laws
difficulty,
like surveillance laws, etc.
the,
Right?
the difficulty that I'm getting to are security clearances. Not everybody has those aplenty.
That's
And I've looked into getting some of those, and they can cost anywhere, I think, from like 8 to 20 grand, depending on the clearance that you're trying to get. So, your best way, if you can ride somebody's coattails, get into it, see if the organization is willing to pay for you to get a clearance, and then stick to it for life and retire with them. You don't
Or
leave.
become a weekend warrior.
Yeah,
A lot of
you-
times that's the best way to do it, is become a weekend warrior. I know it sucks. You got to sign up for the military and go to drill once a month. But that's how a lot of people around me have gotten it. They went and got their bachelor's. They became a weekend warrior, which paid for their education. That's a plus. And then they were able to get their secret or top secret clearance with the military. And then that just shoes them right into Northrop Grumman or Boeing or any of the big companies that are hiring for cybersecurity. So,
No,
but you're 100% right. Now, looking back at it, I'm like, shit, I don't have that. How do I get that? Right? You need someone to find a sponsor, and it's not the easiest thing to do.
no. And little side rant about that entire damn thing. I looked into it because I was like, I'm going to pivot my career and I'm going to join the Air Force or whichever one of these armed forces I want to and join their cyber team. But then I find out that I have to go through basic just like everybody else, which I don't know why, because I'm a keyboard warrior. I don't
You're
need to
still in the
exercise my
military,
wrists.
man. It's okay. One of the guys I work with just came back from Space Force. Dan, good job on that. He's now full officer in Space Force, but mainly just because that's what he does. He does a lot of the computer side. So,
And one of the things
anyone who
that
can do it.
one thing that I think people would really struggle with, though, is and it's kind of the same thing that I would struggle with this, and why it's not for me, is when you do military, again, you get assigned to something, and sometimes that means you're going to be doing red team, and sometimes that red team stuff is going to be stuff that makes you uncomfortable. It might actually harm people in other places, right? You don't really get that choice. You take those orders and you move forward, right? And it's very disconcerting in that regard, knowing that that's a possibility. And I know a lot of people would be uncomfortable like that from that. I am one of those people, but there are some people who would be okay with that. And if that's the case, maybe this job's for you.
All right, so let's wrap this up, guys. If you had to give somebody one bit of advice of getting into cybersecurity, although we just shit all over it, let's say you still want to get into cybersecurity, what advice would you give a newcomer coming into the field?
Be okay being uncomfortable. Be willing to start at the bottom. I know you just got that degree and it's new and it's shiny, but it absolutely means nothing in our world. You have to start at the bottom just like everybody else.
Embrace compliance and technical writing. There's a lot more jobs aplenty there, and it's a lot less stressful, and it's a lot less forward facing as far as like being the response team or being blue team, where you're responsible for the main issues and incidents that occur. Compliance is not a bad job. It's just boring, and that's not a bad place to be when you consider what cybersecurity could be.
I think my little bit of advice would be willing to take a position that might not be cyber right off the bat. You might be able to go into networking or assist admin and maybe step your way into security as you go along.
Just keep learning.
Ooh, keep learning.
Keep
Why
learning.
didn't I think about that one? That was a good one. I think we all need that.
Well, that's
All
this
right, guys.
episode of Life in Cyber.
What?
Go learn.
I
Start
didn't
at
hear
the bottom.
anything you said.
Climb that ladder, bitches.
Exactly.
Love you guys. Bye.